Li Dai fell to her knees on the ground and began to prostrate herself before Lu Sheng. He simply started to observe her and remained silently thinking of some way to punish her for having tried to poison him. Li Dai lifted her head and didn't even dare to look Lu Sheng in the eyes. Her eyes filled with guilt, and with a trembling voice she prepared to accept any punishment. She was even willing to die. Lu Sheng sat in the train seat, crossed his legs, extended his hand sideways, and with a calm look asked her to sit down so they could talk about this. Li Dai lowered her head again, and her eyes filled with fear and regret. She couldn't help but start to sweat and turn red. She refused since she knew what Lu Sheng wanted to ask. She was willing to reveal everything. Lu Sheng began to stare at her intently and with a look full of confidence asked if the people from the Jidao gym had been the ones who ordered the murder. Upon hearing this, Li Dai raised her head and couldn't help but be taken aback. With a surprised look she confirmed this by asking if Lu Sheng already knew the truth. He left the jar that contained the poison on the table, crossed his arms, looked away, and revealed that he had found out about this approximately a month ago. But now this did not matter. He wanted to know what rewards they had promised her. She started to sweat even more, and with a sincere look began to stammer, revealing that they had promised her 50 million. Lu Sheng took the jar of poison in his hand, threw it in the air, making the jar start to spin. He began to observe it with a serene look and thought that the reward must be quite good since after all someone's life like his was quite valuable, asking her if she knew how much this jar cost. Li Dai didn't even lift her head, and with a sad look explained that a drop of this poison had a price of 5 million. And the jar had at least more than 15 drops. Lu Sheng picked up the jar with 2 fingers, brought it closer to his face, started to observe it, and with a smile thought that they really had invested quite a bit in this plan. After saying this, he asked if she had anything else to say. Without hesitating for a second, Li Dai leaned her hands on the ground, lowered her head and prostrated herself before him. She knew that her sins were unforgivable. She only asked not to be sent back to the military barracks. She was willing to accept death to atone for her sins. Lu Sheng started to look at her and his eyes began to emit a blue energy. He did not plan to kill her or send her back to the military barracks, but in return he needed her to do a favor to compensate for the mistake she had made. Several hours later, at the high-speed train station, many taxis began to arrive in the area. The sky was clear and it was a splendid day. At that moment Lu Sheng's train arrived at the station, and the doors opened. The train attendants wished him a good trip. Lu Sheng, who had one hand inside his pants pocket, stepped out of the train. And not long after, a crowd formed around him. Everyone was astonished to see that this train line had only been opened for him. Lu Sheng began to walk calmly towards the exit as if nothing had happened, paying no attention to the others. Among the crowd was also the friend of Li Dai's deceased parents. Seeing that Lu Sheng was still alive, his eyes filled with confusion and he couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and feel furious. A while later, Li Dai, who now wore a hood, got off the train. The man turned his head back and upon seeing her, panicked and with an angry look asked what she was doing and how it was possible that Lu Sheng was still alive. She simply started to look down and approach him. With a sincere look, she revealed that she had not had the opportunity to act. He approached her and could not help but start staring at her with an aggressive look. He did not know then why she had called him, nor why she had not followed Lu Sheng all the time. Li Dai remained calm, approached him and with a calm look explained that Lu Sheng had asked her for help to do something. Just before the man could process this, Li Dai hugged the man and threw herself towards the train. With a determined look she revealed that they were going to die together. Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but go into shock and his eyes filled with confusion as he didn't know what was happening. Both fell onto the train tracks, and Li Dai hugged the man even tighter, making him unable to move. Just then the high-speed train started moving and began advancing towards them at great speed. Seeing this, people began to approach the area. Everyone was shocked to see that they had thrown themselves onto the train tracks to commit suicide and thought that this was not good. Lu Sheng began to observe this, and with a confident look he assumed that this time Li Dai should have completed the mission successfully. He had just planted a seed of mental power in her mind. This was quite a good technique similar to hypnosis. Lu Sheng extended his hand, and his palm began to emit the same energy as the seed of mental power. He started to observe his palm and fell silent. Before he had always ignored this treasure that was mental power. If he could use an 8th level mental power well, then his overall strength would increase greatly, including mental illusion and will control. When Lu Sheng had planted this seed in Li Dai's mind, her eyes had turned lilac and she had lost control over her mind. In short, it was about using mental power to deceive the opponent's 5 senses, creating a world that one wanted them to perceive. Like in a dream, the seed of mental power he had planted in Li Dai was simple, serving as redemption. A few minutes later, the train passed over the body of Lai Dai and her parents' friend, leaving only crushed and unrecognizable corpses. The ambulance arrived and two men placed the corpses on a stretcher and began to take them away. To cleanse her body's sins, sacrificing her life alone would be enough, since after all a mistake was a mistake, and naturally there must be payment for it. Now that Lu Sheng had done this, he realized that his heart had hardened quite a bit. Lu Sheng left the train station and with a look of no remorse began to walk, if in this way he could protect those around him from being harmed. He did not care that his heart hardened more. Upon seeing that Lion Su wanted to play, he decided to accompany her until the end. At the same time, in the Huafu residential area, more precisely at Lu Sheng's house, Governor Zia arrived. Upon seeing this, Lu Sheng's father opened the door, turned around and with an excited look asked Lu Sheng's mother, Zio, he to go prepare tea for the guests. Governor Zia, who had his arms behind his back, entered the house and with a kind smile asked why he was being so formal if they were old friends, revealing that today a great figure from the military district was going to arrive in the city of Bei. He had come to receive him and on the way decided to stop by to greet them. The father explained that today Lu Sheng was also going to return home. Upon hearing this, Governor Zia began to thank with his hand and couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that today Lu Sheng would also be returning home? Zia Pingnan was very lucky, since today he would be able to enjoy Mrs. Lu's homemade food again. Lu Sheng's father, who had one hand behind his back, gently placed the other on Zia Pingnan's shoulder, closed his eyes and while laughing explained that Governor Zia was used to delicacies from mountain and sea, so eating their simple homemade food every now and then felt novel for him. Zia Pingnan closed his eyes and began to show a kind smile. According to him, Mr. Lu was very modest, since raising the national champion of the martial arts test Dinglong was not an easy task. Zio, he appeared, put one hand over her mouth and started moving her hands, indicating that it was not necessary to praise her so much. After a while, Zia Pingnan and Lu Sheng's father sat down. Zio, he prepared a cup of green tea for the governor, and someone left it on the table. This person was none other than King, Lu Sheng's younger sister. While she was holding the tray with her hands, she approached Zia Pingnan, began to observe him with a cheerful look and with a smile asked him to please drink some tea. Zia Pingnan obeyed, took the cup of hot tea and with a sincere look thanked her. He brought the cup of tea to his mouth, prepared to take a sip, closed his eyes and thought that Lu Sheng was a peculiar character. Before, Zia Pingnan did not usually pay so much attention to him, but every time he did, Lu Sheng surprised him enormously. He started to remember the monster Lu Sheng massacring the criminals. A long time ago, it had been Lu Sheng who had eliminated the entire gang of Ma Goyan, one of the most wanted criminals in the country. He started to remember Lu Sheng delivering a strong punch to a spirit, making a big hole in its body. He remembered that he had broken the records of the Tower of the Seven Saints. He started to remember Lu Sheng defeating the Jidao twins. One of them had transformed into a monster, but still was not a match for Lu Sheng. In the National Martial Arts Competition for university students, he had surpassed the Jiado twins and the prodigy Sheng Maio, and had been crowned champion. He began to imagine Lu Sheng staring at him intently. He took a sip of tea, set the cup aside, and his eyes filled with amazement. Our boy never ceased to surprise him. It had been 2 years since they last saw each other, and he assumed that by now he should have reached master level, something incredibly impressive. He moved the teacup away from him, and with a happy look began to observe his own reflection. Although back then he had only come to congratulate Lu Sheng as a usual investment. Establishing relationships with some exceptional talents could often generate returns of tens or even hundreds of times. Next to him was another man, who was enjoying a delicious cup of tea. Zia Pignan's eyes filled with pride, and he couldn't help but smile. He had seen a seed that had now become a gigantic tree. President Xiao Yu was already starting to enjoy the benefits of his investment, and he was preparing to be the vice president of the Martial Arts Association of the capital. Lu Sheng's father began to look at the watch on his wrist and with a surprised look remembered that Lu Sheng had returned from the military district. Calculating the time, he assumed that his son should arrive soon. Upon hearing his voice, Zia Pingnan came out of his trance, began to observe him and couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. With a stunned look, he asked him if Lu Sheng had really joined the military district. The father put his hands on his hips, closed his eyes and with a smile explained that Lu Sheng had said that university seemed boring to him and that's why he had enlisted in the army. Some time ago he had said that he planned to move to the Eastern Military District. This was madness, since he had barely been in university for less than half a year, and had already gone to the army, which was something very dangerous. With a serene look, Zia Pingnan began to look at him and stayed listening in silence without interrupting. He couldn't help but close his eyes and start smiling upon seeing that Lu Sheng wanted to take the family with him to the Eastern Military District. He assumed that he was doing well in the army. For him, Lu Sheng was like a dragon that had entered the sea. It wouldn't be long before he reached the sky. At that moment, a sound began to be heard through the window. Xia Pingnan turned his head towards the window and with a serene look realized that this sound was the car horn. He stood up, turned his back to them, and with a serious look explained that it must be the vehicle of the general of the brigade of the district of Dongning province, who had probably come to pick him up. He apologized to them as he was going to receive the distinguished guest. Lu Sheng's mother, who had her hands on her abdomen, began to show a smile. The father began to say goodbye to him with his hand and with a cheerful look decided to go down together to welcome him so as not to be rude. Once they left the house, a large number of bodyguards placed a red carpet in front of the house and lined up beside it. Upon seeing the enormous amount of bodyguards, people began to gather wondering what such an important character was going to come visit. At that moment, a luxurious military car arrived in the area and stopped right in front of Lu Sheng's house. Upon seeing this, Xia Pingnan's eyes filled with astonishment. The ostentation of old Kayan was something that made him envious every time he saw it. Our boy's father was dumbfounded at such a grand scene. The brigade general, Kayan, a handsome and elegant man, opened the car door and got out. Upon seeing Kayan, Xia Pingnan began to smile, and with a cheerful look, started to wave at him. Instead of returning the greeting, Kayan turned to him, put his finger near his mouth, and with a serious look asked him to lower his voice. Upon hearing this, Xia Pingnan couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Kayan put his arms behind his back, approached the back door of the car, closed his eyes and greeted the general. After saying this, he began to open the car door. Xia Pingnan couldn't help but be dumbfounded and start sweating upon seeing that there was someone else in the car with a higher rank than old Kayan from the military district. He turned around, and with a serious look, he began to indicate to Lu Sheng's family to return home. He did not know why the general would come here. For him this was strange. With such an important figure present, it was better for Lu Sheng's family to go back home. He had to hurry up and line up to welcome the general. Lu Sheng's father was somewhat confused but without hesitating for a second decided to follow his order. He placed his hand on Lu Sheng's mother's shoulder and with a surprised look decided that it was better for them to withdraw so as not to interfere in the reception of the high command. The mother closed her eyes, clenched her fist and felt relieved to see that Lu Sheng had not yet arrived. King began to look to one side and upon seeing what was in front of her, she could not help but be shocked. At that moment, Kayan opened the car door, and the general got out and started walking towards them. Lu Sheng's family prepared to leave, but at that moment, with a surprised look, King asked them to wait a moment. This general was none other than Lu Sheng. He began to observe them with a serene look and remained silent. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.